The fluorescent lights in the basement of Ashford and Partners flickered with their usual irritating rhythm as Deanna Carter glanced up from her cluttered desk to see her 8-year-old son, Marcus, standing in the doorway of the file room. His small backpack hung off one shoulder and his eyes were wide with confusion as he held up a faded photograph he had found in an old case file. "Why is Dad crying?" he asked, pointing to the image of a man in a courtroom sketch. Diana felt her heart stop for just a moment. The question was innocent, a child trying to understand, a world of grown-up emotions captured in yellowed paper, but it landed like a thunderclap in her chest. She had spent 15 years in this dim corner of the law firm, buried among banker boxes and forgotten records, doing the work that built empires for others while she remained invisible. But Marcus, her beautiful boy who did not yet understand betrayal or injustice, had just asked the question that would unravel everything. Please support us by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Diana Carter looked every bit the part of what people expected from a paralegal tucked away in the basement of a prestigious corporate law firm. Her clothes were simple and practical, dark slacks from a discount store and a plain blouse that had seen too many wash cycles, chosen not for style but for their ability to hide the wear and tear of her double life as a working single mother. At 42, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that most people in the building never noticed because they rarely looked at her long enough to see anything beyond her function. For 15 years, she had worked at Ashford and Partners, a gleaming tower of legal power where the top floors boasted floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, and the basement, where Diana spent her days, felt like a different world entirely. The file room was a maze of industrial shelving units, the air always slightly stale with the scent of old paper and toner from the ancient copy machine that jammed at least twice a week. Diana had a small desk wedged between 2 rows of filing cabinets, no window, no nameplate, just a rickety office chair and a computer monitor that flickered whenever someone upstairs ran the microwave. She arrived every morning at 7:30, riding 2 buses from the small apartment she shared with Marcus, and she often did not leave until well after the cleaning crew had made their rounds. Her coworkers on the upper floors knew her only as the paralegal who could find any document in minutes, the woman who never complained, who never asked for time off, who seemed content to remain in the shadows while others climbed the ladder of success above her head. Richard Ashford occupied a corner office on the 23rd floor, a space so vast and so perfectly appointed that clients often paused in the doorway just to take in the view of the city stretching out like a kingdom beneath him. He was 58 years old, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, with the kind of confident smile that made juries trust him and opposing counsel nervous. His desk was a slab of polished mahogany that cost more than Diana made in 6 months, and the walls were lined with framed accolades, photographs of richer shaking hands with senators and CEOs, plaques commemorating victories in high-profile cases that had cemented his reputation as one of the most formidable attorneys in corporate law. Richard Ashford was a managing partner, a name that commanded respect in legal circles, a man whose opinion could make or break careers within the firm. 15 years ago, when Deanna had first been hired as a junior paralegal fresh out of what everyone assumed was a certificate program, Richard had been a senior partner on the rise, hungry and sharp-eyed, and always looking for an edge. He had noticed something about Diana early on, a quality that others overlooked because they were too busy dismissing her. She had a mind for legal strategy that was almost uncanny, an ability to see angles and arguments that even the most experienced attorneys missed. Richard had started small, asking her to pull research for a case he was working on, then requesting that she draft a memo summarizing her findings. When he read what she had written, he realized he had stumbled onto something valuable, and he made Diana an offer that sounded generous at the time. "Help me with my cases," he said, "and I will make sure you are taken care of. I will see that you move up in this firm." Diana, young and hopeful and desperately in need of stable employment, had believed him. What began as an occasional request became a pattern, and the pattern became a system of exploitations so seamless that it seemed almost invisible to everyone except Diana herself. Richard would arrive at her desk in the basement, always with that same warm smile, always with a case file under his arm and a tone that suggested they were partners in some grand endeavor. "I need your brilliant mind on this one," he would say, as though he were doing her a favor by including her. Diana would spend hours, sometimes days, poring over statutes and precedents, drafting legal briefs that laid out arguments with surgical precision, constructing strategies that anticipated every move an opponent might make. She would hand her work to Richard, and he would take it upstairs, polish it just enough to add his own voice, and present it in meetings with clients and colleagues, as though the ideas had sprung fully formed from his own intellect. The cases he won, and he won most of them, were built on foundations Diana had constructed in the dim light of the basement. The promotions he earned, the bonuses he collected, the reputation he cultivated as a legal genius, all of it rested on work that bore his name but had been created by someone the firm barely acknowledged. Richard never credited her in meetings, never mentioned her contributions in the carefully worded emails he sent to clients celebrating their victories. In the office, when colleagues were around, he referred to her as my girl or my helper, words that made her sound like an assistant fetching coffee rather than the architect of his success. Diana felt the sting of those words every time, the casual dismissal, the subtle assertion that she existed only to serve him, but she swallowed her anger because she needed the job and because Richard had convinced her that speaking up would only make things worse for her. Diana had her reasons for staying silent, reasons that kept her chained to the basement desk even as her resentment grew like a slow-burning fire in her chest. She was a single mother, a reality that shaped every decision she made, every risk she could not afford to take. Marcus had been born when Diana was in her early 30s, the product of a relationship that had dissolved before his first birthday, leaving her to navigate parenthood alone. Raising a child on a paralegal salary in an expensive city was a high-wire act with no safety net, and Diana lived in constant fear of the fall. She needed the health insurance that came with her job, because Marcus had asthma, the kind that flared up unpredictably and sent them to urgent care in the middle of the night. She needed the steady paycheck because rent was due on the first every month, and there was no partner to split the burden, no family wealth to fall back on. Just her and the income from a position that paid her far less than her work was worth. Richard knew this, understood the precarious nature of her situation, and he used it with the skill of a man who had built a career on finding leverage. Whenever Diana seemed like she might push back, might ask for recognition or fair compensation, Richard would remind her how difficult the job market was, how lucky she was to have a position at a prestigious firm like Ashford and Partners. "You know how hard it is out there," he would say, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Especially for people at your level, people like you." The words were never explicitly racist, but the implication hung in the air like smoke, the suggestion that a black woman without obvious credentials should be grateful for whatever crumbs she was given. Diana would nod and return to her desk, her jaw tight, her mind cataloging every slight, every injustice, every moment of humiliation, and she would add it to the growing list she kept locked away in a place Richard could not see. But Diana Carter was not the person Richard Ashford believed her to be, and the basement office that seemed like a prison was actually the perfect cover for a plan 15 years in the making. On the surface, everything about Diana suggested a woman of limited means, and even more limited options, but there were details that did not quite fit the narrative if anyone had bothered to look closely. The legal pad she carried everywhere, for instance, was not just a place for random notes but a meticulously organized record of every case she worked on, every email Richard sent, every conversation they had about strategy and execution. She wrote in a shorthand she had developed in law school, a place Rich assumed she had never been, and she transferred her notes each night to an encrypted laptop she kept home. There were the phone calls she made during her lunch breaks, stepping outside into the alley behind the building to speak in low tones with someone Richard never knew about, conversations about documentation and legal standards, and the best ways to build an airtight case. And then there was the inheritance, the one piece of her life that existed entirely outside the world of Ashford and Partners. Diana's grandmother had been a woman of quiet wealth, a property owner who had invested wisely in commercial real estate decades before the neighborhood became fashionable. When she passed away, she left everything to Diana through a trust fund that kept her granddaughter's identity carefully hidden behind layers of legal entities and management companies. One of those properties, as it happened, was the very building that housed Ashford and Partners, which meant that every month for the past 15 years, Richard Ashford had been writing rent checks to a company that funneled money directly into Diana's accounts. She had never told anyone at the firm, had never given any indication that she was anything other than what she appeared to be, because she understood that knowledge was power and patience was a weapon, and she had been waiting for the right moment to use both. The $50 million case arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered by a client Richard had been courting for 2 years. Meridian Financial Group, one of the largest investment banks on the East Coast, was being sued by a consortium of smaller banks for securities fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy to manipulate market prices. The damages sought were astronomical, the legal issues were extraordinarily complex, and the case would determine whether Meridian survived as an independent entity or collapsed into bankruptcy and scandal. Richard called an all-hands meeting of the litigation team at 10 o'clock that morning, gathering the associates and junior partners in the main conference room with its polished table and leather chairs. Diana was not invited to the meeting. She learned about the case at 2 in the afternoon, when Richard appeared in the basement archive room, dropped a file box on her desk, and said, "I need you to start on this immediately. Read through the complaint, research every case cited, and draft a preliminary response memo. I need your analysis by Friday." Diana looked at the box, then at Richard. "This is the Meridian case," she said quietly. "Yes," Richard replied, already turning to leave. "This is the most important case this firm has handled in a decade, Diana. I am counting on you." He paused in the doorway and looked back at her, his expression almost kind. "This time will be different, Diana. I will make sure you are recognized. You have my word." Diana watched him disappear up the stairs, heard his footsteps fade, and then she opened the file box and began to read. She knew his promise was worthless. She knew that recognition would never come, that credit would never be given. But this case, this enormous career-defining case, would be her last contribution to Richard Ashford's empire of lies. After this, everything would change. Diana worked through the night on the Meridian case, the fluorescent lights above her desk buzzing their tired song, the building emptied around her. She called Maya, the receptionist, and asked if she could pick Marcus up from aftercare, feed him dinner, help him with homework. Maya, who had watched Diana sacrifice herself for years, agreed immediately. "Baby, you cannot keep doing this," Maya said over the phone. "I know," Diana replied softly. "Just a few more weeks. I promise." She read through 1,000 pages of financial documents, traced the web of transactions between Meridian and the plaintiff banks, identified 12 separate legal theories the plaintiffs were advancing, and researched the case law supporting each one. She drafted a 40-page memo analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of Meridian's position, outlining 3 possible defense strategies and recommending an aggressive counterclaim that could shift the entire dynamic of the litigation. She finished at 4 in the morning, printed the memo, and left it on Richard's desk with a notey initial analysis complete. More research needed on several fronts. Will continue today. When she finally arrived home at 5, Marcus was asleep in his bed, his math homework spread across the kitchen table with Maya's neat handwriting correcting his mistakes. Diana stood in his doorway and watched him breathe, this beautiful boy who deserved so much more than a mother who was never home, and she felt something crack open inside her chest. Not guilt, though there was plenty of that. Not sadness, though she carried oceans of it. What cracked open was resolve. She was done being invisible. She was done being used. She was done letting Richard Ashford steal her life. The complicity of Diana's colleagues was perhaps more painful than Richard's exploitation because it was so willfully blind, so carefully maintained. Jennifer Brooks was a junior partner, 34 years old, blonde and capable, who specialized in white-collar defense work. She had joined the firm 6 years earlier and had risen quickly through the ranks, making partner ahead of several more senior associates. Jennifer was not cruel. She was not openly racist. But she was silent in all the ways that mattered. Diana had watched Jennifer stand outside Richard's office on dozens of occasions, had seen her glance through the open door and observe Richard reviewing documents that Diana had prepared, documents covered with Diana's handwriting and sticky notes. Jennifer knew. She had to know. But she never asked questions, never raised concerns, never suggested that perhaps Diana's work deserved more than a paralegal salary and a basement office. Thomas Chen was a senior partner, 49 years old, who handled major corporate transactions and sat on the firm's executive committee. He was brilliant and hardworking, the son of immigrants who had built his career through merit and determination. He understood what it meant to be underestimated, to have his abilities questioned, to work twice as hard for half the recognition. And yet when he saw Diana carrying boxes of research materials to Richard's office, when he overheard Richard praising work that Diana had clearly produced, Thomas said nothing. He told himself it was not his business. He told himself that firm politics were complicated and that challenging Richard would jeopardize his own position. He told himself that surely Diana knew what she was getting into when she took the job. Richard's manipulation during the Meridian case reached new heights of cruelty, a systematic campaign of micromanagement and public humiliation that seemed designed to remind Diana of her place in the firm hierarchy. He began scheduling daily meetings with the litigation team to discuss case strategy, meetings held in the main conference room at 9 o'clock each morning. Diana was required to attend these meetings, but she was not permitted to sit at the table. Richard instructed her to sit in a chair against the wall, near the door, where she could take notes and be available if anyone needed coffee or water. During these meetings, Richard would present the legal theories and arguments that Diana had researched and developed, speaking with confidence and authority while Diana sat silent against the wall. The associates would ask questions, Richard would answer, and occasionally he would gesture toward Diana and say, "My assistant has prepared some excellent background materials on this issue. If you need copies, she can provide them." Diana was not my assistant. She was the architect of the entire defense strategy. But Richard's language reduced her to a servant, and no one in the room challenged that characterization. On one particularly awful morning, a client visited the office for a strategy session. Richard asked Diana to bring coffee for the group, to arrange the cups on the conference table while he and the client discussed the case. Diana stood at the sideboard, pouring coffee from the silver pot that the firm kept for important visitors, listening to Richard explain a complex securities law argument that she had developed. An argument that relied on a recent Second Circuit decision she had discovered after 3 days of intensive research. The client was impressed. "This is brilliant work, Richard," the client said. "You have really found the key to our defense." Richard smiled modestly and replied, "My team and I have put in a lot of hours on this." Diana set the coffee cup in front of Richard. Their eyes met for a brief second, and Diana saw in his expression a flash of something that might have been shame, but was more likely satisfaction. He had taken everything from her, and he knew she could not stop him. The economic pressure Diana faced was a constant, suffocating weight that Richard understood and exploited with calculated precision. Marcus had developed asthma when he was 5 years old, and his condition required regular doctor visits, expensive medications, and occasional emergency room trips when his breathing became dangerously labored. Diana's health insurance through the firm covered most of the costs, but there were still copays and deductibles that strained her budget every month. She could not afford to lose that insurance. She could not afford to quit. Richard knew this because Diana had once, years earlier, mentioned Marcus' condition when asking for a day off to take him to a specialist appointment. Richard had expressed concern, had told Diana to take whatever time she needed, had said, "Family comes first, Diana. We will take care of you here." But what he meant was that Diana's vulnerability would be remembered and used. When Diana worked late into the night, when she missed Marcus' school events, when she accepted assignments that should have gone to associate attorneys, Richard never had to explicitly threaten her job because the threat was always implicit in the power dynamic. He would sometimes make comments that reinforced her precariousness. "You know how hard it is out there for people at your level, Diana. The legal market is brutal. You are lucky to have stable employment here." The phrase "people at your level" carried multiple meanings. It referred to her job title, her salary, her lack of a law degree on display in his mind, but it also carried racial and class implications that Richard never stated directly but Diana heard clearly. The message was simple: you are expendable, you are fortunate to be here, and you should be grateful for whatever scraps I throw you. Diana was not grateful. She was strategic. Every insulting comment, every exploitative demand, every dollar he paid her while billing her work at $400 per hour, she documented it all. The false hope Richard dangled before Diana during Meridian case was perhaps the most cynical element of his manipulation because it revealed how little he understood about her resilience and how completely he underestimated her intelligence. As the trial date approached and the case grew more complex, Richard began making promises about Diana's future at the firm. In private conversations in his office, he would tell her, "You have really proven yourself on this case, Diana. When this is over, we need to talk about your role here. Maybe it is time we looked at promoting you to a senior paralegal position with better compensation." Or he would say, "The partners have noticed the quality of the work coming out of our team. I have been singing your praises. I think there could be opportunities for you." These promises were designed to keep Diana working, to extract every last ounce of labor before the trial concluded. But they also revealed Richard's fundamental blindness to who Diana actually was. He saw her as someone desperate for his approval, someone whose ambitions could be satisfied with a modest raise and a slightly better title. He did not see the Georgetown-educated attorney documenting his crimes. He did not see the building owner holding his lease. He did not see the woman who had spent 15 years preparing for this exact moment. A week before the trial was scheduled to begin, Richard held a firm-wide meeting in the main conference room to announce the Meridian case and celebrate the work the team had done. Partners and associates filled the room, and Richard stood at the head of the table looking confident and proud. He said, "This case would not be possible without my incredible team. Everyone has worked tirelessly to prepare our defense strategy." Richard named several associates and thanked them for their contributions, even though Diana knew those associates had done little more than proofread documents she had drafted. He did not mention Diana's name. After the meeting, as people filed out, Richard pulled Diana aside and said quietly, "You understand why I cannot give you public credit, right? Client politics, firm dynamics, it is complicated. But I will take care of you. A bonus is coming after we win this case." Diana nodded and said nothing because there was nothing left to say to Richard Ashford. His promises were as empty as his integrity, and she was finished pretending to believe either. Diana's breaking point arrived not with dramatic fanfare but with quiet exhaustion, a moment of clarity in her basement office when she realized she could not endure another day of this life. It was Thursday evening, 4 days before the trial, and Diana had been at the office since 6 that morning. She had drafted a crucial pretrial brief, revised Richard's opening statement to fix 3 significant legal errors he had made, and prepared witness examination outlines for the first week of testimony. Her phone rang at 7:30. It was Marcus, his voice small and scared. "Mom, I cannot breathe very well." Diana's heart stopped. She grabbed her purse and was halfway to the door when Richard appeared in the stairwell. "Diana, where are you going?" "We have the pretrial conference tomorrow morning, and I need you to prepare the exhibits tonight." "My son is having an asthma attack," Diana said, her voice shaking. "I need to take him to the emergency room." Richard frowned. "Can someone else take him?" "This is really important, Diana. Maya is with him, but she is not family. He needs his mother." Diana pushed past Richard and climbed the stairs, feeling his disapproval radiating behind her like heat. At the hospital, Marcus lay in the emergency room bed with an oxygen mask over his small face, his breathing labored and frightening. Diana held his hand and thought about the 15 years she had given to Richard Ashford, 15 years of stolen work and broken promises and quiet humiliation. Marcus looked at her with his wide, trusting eyes and whispered through the mask, "When are you coming home, Mom? I miss you." Diana started to cry then, not the silent professional tears she sometimes shed in her office, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place of absolute exhaustion. Maya, who had met them at the hospital, put her arms around Diana and said, "Girl, you deserve so much better than this." Diana wiped her eyes, looked at her son, and said, "Soon, Maya. Very soon. Everything is about to change." Richard's critical mistake came 2 days before the trial began, born from the overconfidence and arrogance that had defined his entire career. He forwarded an email to the Meridian client, an email that contained Diana's complete litigation strategy for the trial's opening phase, a sophisticated analysis of the plaintiff's case weaknesses, and a step-by-step plan for dismantling their securities fraud claims. The email was marked as coming from Richard Ashford's personal account, with subject line Meridian Defense Strategy Confidential Attorney Work Product. In the body of the email, Richard wrote, "Please review the attached analysis. After extensive research and consultation with my team, I have developed what I believe is a winning approach for the first phase of trial. The approach will allow us to undermine the plaintiff's credibility early and create doubt about their damages calculations. I am confident this strategy will serve us well." The attached document was Diana's work, word for word, with her analysis, her case citations, her strategic recommendations. Richard had not changed a single sentence. He had simply deleted her name from the header and inserted his own. What Richard did not know, what he had never bothered to discover in 15 years, was that Diana had administrative access to the firm's email system. She had been granted that access years ago when the IT department needed someone to manage document retention policies for the litigation department, a tedious task no attorney wanted to handle. Diana had quietly maintained that access, had used it to monitor firm communications, and had saved every email Richard had ever sent claiming her work as his own. She downloaded the email to Meridian, added it to her growing collection of evidence, and felt something close to satisfaction. Richard had just provided the final, incontrovertible proof of his fraud. The morning of the trial arrived with perfect October sunshine streaming through the tall windows of the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan, light so bright it seemed to promise truth and revelation. Diana Carter arrived at 7:30, 2 hours before the trial was scheduled to begin, carrying a sleek leather briefcase that Marcus had never seen before and wearing a charcoal gray suit that fit her like armor. She had visited a salon the previous evening, had her hair styled professionally, had purchased the suit and briefcase with money from the trust fund, and she had finally accessed. She looked like what she was, a Georgetown-educated attorney with 15 years of litigation experience, and she walked through the courthouse doors with her head high and her heart steady. Richard Ashford arrived at 8:15, surrounded by his team of associates, all of them carrying banker boxes filled with trial materials that Diana had prepared. He wore his most expensive suit, navy with subtle pinstripes, and his usual expression of calm confidence. He spotted Diana standing near the courtroom entrance and frowned, confused by her appearance. "Diana, why are you dressed like that? You are not coming into the courtroom." You need to stay in the document room down the hall in case we need additional research. Diana turned to face him, and in her eyes Richard saw something he had never seen before, something that made his confidence waver for just a fraction of a second. Actually, Richard, I am coming into the courtroom as opposing counsel. The words hung in the air between them like a verdict. Richard's associates stopped moving, their boxes suspended in their arms. Richard laughed, a short, dismissive sound. This is absurd, Diana. What are you talking about? Diana opened her briefcase and handed Richard a legal document, her motion to appear as counsel of record for an anonymous whistleblower plaintiff filing a fraud and discrimination lawsuit against Ashford and Partners. I represent multiple clients who have been defrauded by this firm, she said calmly. We are filing in conjunction with the Meridian trial. The judge has already approved my motion. Richard's hands shook as he read the motion, his eyes scanning the legal language that Diana had crafted with surgical precision. This does not make sense, he stammered. You do not even have a law degree. Diana reached into her briefcase again and pulled out a small card, her State of New York attorney registration. She handed it to Richard. Georgetown University Law Center, class of 2007. Bar admission February 2nd, 008. You never asked, Richard. In 15 years, you never once asked about my education or my qualifications. You saw a black woman willing to work for a paralegal salary, and you assumed that was all I was capable of being. Richard looked at the bar card, then at Diana, then back at the card, his mind struggling to process this fundamental inversion of reality. Jennifer Brooks, standing behind Richard, let out a small sound that might have been a gasp or a laugh. Thomas Chen closed his eyes briefly, his expression pained. Richard's voice, when he finally spoke, was tight with panic barely controlled. This does not matter. You have nothing. You are making empty threats to disrupt our trial. Diana smiled then, a small, cold smile that held 15 years of accumulated fury. I have everything, Richard. I have documented every single assignment you gave me, every brief I wrote, every strategy I developed. I have timestamps, drafts with my handwriting, emails where you explicitly asked me to do your legal work. I have recordings of our meetings where you instructed me to research cases that you would present as your own. I have financial records showing you billed my work to clients at $400 per hour while paying me a paralegal salary. Diana opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick binder, laying it on the table between them. This is 15 years of evidence, Richard. Side-by-side comparisons of my original work and your filed briefs. You did not change a word. You just deleted my name and inserted yours. The evidence Diana spread across the table was devastating in its comprehensiveness. A prosecutor's dream of documentation that left no room for doubt or denial. The first section contained 50 pages of email correspondence, printed and organized chronologically, showing Richard's repeated requests for Diana to handle complex legal research and brief writing. The emails were explicit and damning. Diana, I need you to research the statute of limitations issues for the Morrison case and draft a memo outlining our best arguments. I will review it and file it under my name for client presentation. Another email read, the securities fraud analysis you prepared was excellent. I am forwarding it to the client as my work product. Please do not mention your involvement to anyone. The second section contained document comparisons. Diana's original research memos and briefs displayed on the left side of each page. Richard's filed court documents on the right side, with every identical sentence highlighted in yellow. Page after page showed perfect matches, not just similar language or paraphrased concepts, but word-for-word copying that constituted both plagiarism and fraud. The third section contained audio transcripts from recordings Diana had made during private meetings with Richard, conversations where he had explicitly told her to write briefs he would claim as his own work. Diana had marked the most incriminating passages with red tabs. Richard's voice on the recording said clearly, I need you to understand that clients expect to see partner-level work, so everything you produce will be filed under my name. This is how law firms operate. You do the work, I take the credit, and we all benefit. The fourth section contained financial analysis showing the systematic wage theft Richard had committed. Diana had calculated that over 15 years, Richard had billed approximately 14,000 hours of her work to clients, generating roughly $5.6 million in revenue, while paying her a total of $720,000 in salary. The profit margin on her exploitation was obscene. Diana turned to the next section of her binder, her voice steady and clear as she continued to dismantle Richard's world. This section documents the firm-wide discrimination that allowed your fraud to flourish, Richard. I have hiring records showing that Ashford and Partners has not promoted a single black employee to attorney or partner position in 20 years, despite receiving hundreds of qualified applications from law school graduates of color. I have pay disparity data demonstrating that even among paralegal and support staff, black employees are consistently compensated 15 to 30% less than white employees in identical positions with similar experience. I have documented testimony from 12 current and former black employees describing a pattern of racial microaggressions, hostile work environment, and systematic exclusion from advancement opportunities. Diana pulled out a statistical chart showing the firm's employment demographics over 2 decades, a visual representation of discrimination so stark it could not be explained by coincidence or merit-based hiring. Richard tried to interrupt, tried to say something about business realities and client preferences, but Diana continued speaking, her voice rising slightly with controlled anger. I have records of qualified black law school graduates who applied to this firm and were rejected, while less qualified white candidates from lower-ranked schools were hired. I have documentation of partnership decisions where black associates were passed over in favor of white associates with weaker track records. I have emails from partners, including you, Richard, discussing concerns about whether clients would be comfortable working with attorneys of color. Thomas Chen, standing behind Richard, made a sound of distress. Jennifer Brooks had tears in her eyes. The courtroom deputy opened the doors at 8:45, and Diana walked into the trial courtroom where the Meridian case would be heard, where Richard Ashford's career would end and her own vindication would begin. Judge Patricia Morrison presided over this courtroom, a 62-year-old African-American woman who had spent 30 years as a litigator before being appointed to the federal bench. Diana had specifically requested that her case be heard in conjunction with the Meridian trial because she knew the timing would maximize impact, would force Richard to confront his fraud in the most public and humiliating way possible. Richard and his associates filed into the courtroom behind Diana, their confidence shattered, their trial preparation suddenly meaningless. The Meridian clients sat in the gallery, confused by the tension they sensed. Judge Morrison took the bench promptly at 9 o'clock, reviewed the motion Diana had filed, and looked up with an expression that was carefully neutral but held an edge of steel. Miss Carter, I have reviewed your motion to appear as counsel and your preliminary evidence of fraud allegations against Ashford and Partners. This is highly unusual to have these matters arise simultaneous to a major trial. Please explain your position. Diana stood, and for the first time in 15 years, she spoke in a courtroom as an attorney, rather than as a paralegal fetching coffee. Your Honor, I represent multiple whistleblower clients who have been defrauded by Ashford and Partners through systematic billing fraud, misrepresentation of attorney work product, and civil conspiracy. The evidence shows that managing partner Richard Ashford has spent 15 years stealing my legal work, filing it under his name, and billing clients millions of dollars for services he did not actually perform. Additionally, my clients are victims of workplace discrimination based on race, a pattern of behavior that enabled and concealed this fraud. Judge Morrison's expression hardened. These are serious allegations, Miss Carter. Mr. Ashford, would you like to respond? Richard stood slowly, his face pale. Your Honor, this is absurd. Miss Carter was a paralegal, not an attorney. She is a disgruntled employee making false accusations to disrupt our trial. Diana remained standing, her voice calm but firm as she addressed the judge's unspoken question. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like to submit my evidence for immediate review. I have documentation that proves every allegation I have made. Judge Morrison nodded. Proceed, Miss Carter. Diana approached the bench with her binder, handing it to the judge along with a flash drive containing audio recordings and additional digital evidence. As Your Honor will see, I have emails from Mr. Ashford explicitly requesting that I perform attorney-level legal work that he would then claim as his own. I have document comparisons showing word-for-word copying of my briefs into court filings under his name. I have audio recordings of conversations where Mr. Ashford instructed me to write case strategies he would present to clients. I have financial records showing systematic wage theft and billing fraud. And I have statistical evidence of racial discrimination in hiring, promotion, and compensation practices at this firm. Judge Morrison spent 20 minutes reviewing the evidence, her expression growing increasingly severe as she read emails, examined document comparisons, and reviewed the statistical analysis. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of turning pages and the judge's occasional notes. Richard sat at the defense table with his head in his hands. Jennifer Brooks stared at her lap. Thomas Chen looked like he wanted to disappear. Finally, Judge Morrison looked up, and her voice, when she spoke, carried the weight of judicial authority and moral outrage. Mr. Ashford, this evidence is extraordinarily troubling. If these allegations are proven, you have committed fraud against your clients, theft of intellectual property, wage theft against Miss Carter, and potentially criminal misconduct. Richard tried to speak, tried to mount some defense, but his voice cracked. Your Honor, Diana, we can settle this. We can work something out. Diana, name your price. We can resolve this privately. Diana turned to face Richard fully, her expression cold and resolute. This is not about money, Richard. This is about justice. For me, for every person you exploited, for every black woman who was told she was not good enough while people like you stole her work and claimed her genius as your own. The power reversal in the courtroom was absolute and irreversible, a transformation so complete that several people in the gallery would later describe it as watching a building collapse in slow motion. Judge Morrison addressed Richard with barely controlled fury. Mr. Ashford, I am ordering an immediate investigation into these allegations. The Meridian trial is postponed pending resolution of this matter. You are to surrender all case files, all client communications, and all financial records to the court within 48 hours. If Miss Carter's evidence is verified, you will face sanctions, disbarment proceedings, and potential criminal charges for fraud. Richard opened his mouth to protest, but Judge Morrison cut him off. Do not speak, Mr. Ashford. You have done enough damage. At that moment, Jennifer Brooks stood from the defense table, her voice shaking but determined. Your Honor, I would like to testify. Everything Miss Carter has said is true. I have witnessed Mr. Ashford taking her work for 6 years. I knew what was happening, and I did nothing to stop it. I am ashamed of my silence, and I want to make it right. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Thomas Chen stood as well, his face gray. Your Honor, I also have testimony to provide. I have been aware of discriminatory hiring and promotion practices at this firm. I convinced myself it was not my responsibility to intervene. I was wrong. Judge Morrison looked at the two attorneys with an expression that mixed surprise and approval. Your cooperation will be noted. Miss Brooks, Mr. Chen, please submit written statements to the court by end of business today. Then the courtroom doors opened and Maya Johnson, the firm's receptionist, walked in carrying a box of documents. She approached the bench with quiet dignity. Your Honor, my name is Maya Johnson. I work at Ashford & Partners as a receptionist. For 15 years I have watched Miss Carter be exploited and disrespected. I have kept copies of documents, emails, and schedules that prove what Mr. Ashford did. I brought them today. Judge Morrison accepted the box, and Diana felt tears sting her eyes for the first time that morning. The revelation of Diana's true identity and power came in stages, each layer more shocking than the last, each truth more devastating to Richard's crumbling world. After Maya submitted her evidence, Diana addressed the court again. Your Honor, there is one additional matter the court should be aware of. I have not been entirely forthcoming about my personal circumstances. Richard Ashford has spent 15 years treating me as a powerless employee dependent on his goodwill for survival. He exploited what he believed was my economic vulnerability. What he did not know, what he never bothered to discover, was that I am not vulnerable in the way he assumed. Diana pulled out another document from her briefcase, a trust fund statement and property deed. My grandmother, Eleanor Carter, passed away in 2010. She left me a substantial trust fund and several properties in Manhattan, including the building at 485 Madison Avenue. That building, Your Honor, is where Ashford and Partners maintains its offices. For 15 years, Richard Ashford's rent checks have been deposited into my trust account. I own the ground beneath his feet. I have always owned it. The courtroom went completely silent. Richard's face turned from pale to ashen gray. The Meridian clients in the gallery looked at each other in shock. One of them stood up and addressed the judge. Your Honor, my name is Robert Chen, General Counsel for Meridian Financial Group. If what Miss Carter is saying is true, if Mr. Ashford has been committing fraud and stealing work product, then Meridian has been deceived about who was actually providing our legal services. We paid millions of dollars believing we were receiving Mr. Ashford's expertise. If Miss Carter was the actual attorney doing the work, we want her representing us, not Mr. Ashford. Other clients in the gallery began to stand, their voices overlapping with similar statements. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. This court will address client representation issues after we resolve the fraud allegations. Miss Carter, do you have anything further to present? Diana looked at Richard Ashford, this man who had stolen 15 years of her life and her work, and she felt not triumph but a deep, weary sadness for all the time that had been wasted, all the dignity that had been stolen. I have one more piece of evidence, Your Honor. Diana pulled out a printed email, the one Richard had sent to Meridian just 2 days earlier, the email claiming her trial strategy as his own brilliant work. This email was sent by Mr. Ashford to Meridian Financial 48 hours ago. It contains my complete litigation strategy for the trial that was supposed to begin today. Every word of analysis, every legal argument, every tactical recommendation in this email was written by me. Mr. Ashford did not change a single sentence. He simply put his name at the top and claimed it as his original work. She handed the email to the judge, along with her original draft, showing metadata timestamps proving she had created the document. Your Honor, this email is proof that Mr. Ashford's fraud was ongoing until this very moment. He has learned nothing. He has felt no remorse. He continued to exploit my work until the moment I stopped him. Judge Morrison read the email, compared it to Diana's original document, and her expression shifted from anger to something colder and more final. Mr. Ashford, I have seen enough. Your behavior constitutes fraud, theft of services, and misrepresentation to clients and this court. I am referring this matter to the State Bar for immediate disciplinary proceedings. I am also ordering that you be removed as managing partner of Ashford and Partners effective immediately, and that you have no contact with firm clients pending investigation. Furthermore, I am awarding preliminary judgment to Miss Carter on her whistleblower claims and ordering this firm to pay restitution for wage theft, emotional distress, and punitive damages to be calculated after full accounting of billable hours. Richard Ashford, you are a disgrace to the legal profession. Court is adjourned. Richard sat frozen at the defense table, his career ended, his reputation destroyed, his world collapsed around him. Diana closed her briefcase and walked out of the courtroom. In the gallery, Marcus sat with Maya, having been allowed to miss school to watch his mother reclaim her life. As Diana passed, Marcus reached out and touched her hand. Mom, he whispered, you are not crying anymore. Diana smiled at her son. No, baby, I am not crying anymore. The months following the courtroom confrontation brought transformation to Ashford and Partners that was both painful and necessary. a complete restructuring of power and culture that required everyone in the firm to confront their complicity and choose whether they wanted to be part of something better. Judge Morrison's ruling had been comprehensive and uncompromising. Richard Ashford was stripped of his partnership, ordered to pay Diana $3.2 million in restitution for wage theft, and required to complete 200 hours of diversity and ethics training before he would be eligible to practice law again, assuming he survived the bar disciplinary proceedings. The firm itself was placed under court-supervised restructuring, required to implement transparent hiring and promotion practices, establish an independent diversity oversight committee, and submit to annual audits of its employment practices and compensation structures. The financial penalties were severe, but Judge Morrison had made clear that the goal was not destruction, but education and transformation. Mr. Ashford, you have been given a position of extraordinary privilege and power in our society, the judge had said during sentencing. You used that power to exploit and harm others. You will now have the opportunity to learn why that was wrong, to understand the systems of discrimination you participated in, and to demonstrate whether you are capable of change. This is not mercy. This is accountability with the possibility of redemption. Diana had watched Richard leave the courthouse that day, his shoulders slumped, his expensive suite suddenly looking like a costume he no longer deserved to wear. She felt no satisfaction in his humiliation, only a quiet hope that he might actually learn something from this experience, that the education component of his sentence might create genuine transformation rather than merely punishment. The firm's partnership voted unanimously to offer Diana the position of managing partner, a decision that reflected both genuine respect for her abilities and pragmatic recognition that half their clients had already requested that Diana take over their cases. Diana accepted the position with conditions that reshaped the firm's entire structure. She required that the partnership commit to recruiting from historically black colleges and universities, that hiring decisions be made by diverse committees rather than individual partners, that all attorneys undergo implicit bias training, and that compensation be tied not only to billable hours but to mentorship and diversity advancement efforts. She insisted that support staff, paralegals, and administrative employees be treated with dignity and respect, that their contributions be acknowledged, and that pathways to attorney positions be created for those who wanted to pursue legal education. Within 6 months, the firm hired 3 new associates from Howard University Law School, promoted 2 paralegals to attorney positions with firm-sponsored bar preparation support, and established a partnership track specifically designed to support attorneys from underrepresented backgrounds. Jennifer Brooks became Diana's closest ally in this transformation process, bringing genuine commitment and hard-won understanding to the work. Her willingness to benefit from a system she knew was unjust. She now led the firm's bias training programs, speaking with raw honesty about her failures and her learning process. I saw what was happening to Diana, Jennifer told a room full of attorneys during a training session, and I told myself it was not my responsibility to intervene. I told myself that speaking up would jeopardize my career. I prioritized my comfort over her dignity, and that is something I will carry with me forever. But I am committed to doing better, to using my privilege to create change rather than maintain injustice. Thomas Chen had also undergone profound transformation, stepping down from the executive committee to focus on mentoring young attorneys of color and advocating for systemic change within the legal profession. He joined the board of the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association and became a vocal advocate for diversity in law firm leadership, speaking at conferences about the cost of silence and complicity. In one particularly powerful presentation, Thomas described watching Diana carry research materials to Richard's office year after year, knowing that her work was being stolen and choosing to say nothing. I convinced myself that it was not my place to intervene, that firm politics were too complex, that protecting my own position was more important than protecting Diana's dignity, he said. I was wrong. Silence in the face of injustice is collaboration with injustice. I benefited from a system that exploited Diana, and I am committed to dismantling that system. Thomas established a fund to support law students from working-class backgrounds, recognizing that economic barriers often prevented talented students from marginalized communities from accessing legal education. He personally mentored 5 young attorneys, spending hours each week reviewing their work, introducing them to clients, and advocating for their advancement. Maya Johnson, the receptionist who had quietly documented 15 years of discrimination and brought evidence to court, was promoted to office manager and then to director of firm operations. Diana insisted that Maya's institutional knowledge and her commitment to justice made her invaluable to the firm's leadership team. Maya now oversaw hiring practices, worked directly with the Diversity Oversight Committee, and ensured that support staff had voice and representation in firm decisions. The change in firm culture was visible in countless small moments that accumulated into something profound. Partners learned support staff members' names, asked about their families, said please and thank you. Meetings were scheduled with consideration for childcare responsibilities and school pickup times. Credit for work was given accurately, with junior attorneys and paralegals named on briefs they had contributed to. Microaggressions were called out immediately and addressed through restorative conversations rather than being ignored or minimized. The firm established employee affinity groups for Black attorneys, LGBTQ staff, working parents, and first-generation professionals, creating spaces where people could build community and advocate for their needs. Diana herself led monthly town hall meetings where any employee, regardless of position, could raise concerns or suggest improvements. The transformation was not without resistance. Several senior partners, uncomfortable with the new accountability and transparency requirements, left the firm to join more traditional practices. Some clients, particularly those who valued old boy networks and traditional hierarchies, took their business elsewhere. But the firm also attracted new clients who were drawn to its commitment to equity and justice, corporations and organizations that wanted legal representation aligned with their own values. Meridian Financial Group remained a client, with the general counsel stating publicly that Deanna Carter was the best attorney they had ever worked with and that her integrity and brilliance had saved their company. New associates lined up to interview at the firm, attracted by its reputation as a place where talent was recognized regardless of race or background, where mentorship was genuine, and where advancement was possible for everyone willing to work hard and contribute meaningfully. Within a year of Deanna's appointment as managing partner, the firm's revenue had actually increased, demonstrating that justice and profitability were not mutually exclusive. Richard Ashford's journey was more complicated and uncertain, a process of reckoning that remained incomplete, but showed glimmers of genuine change. He completed his diversity and ethics training not in the perfunctory way many professionals approach such requirements, but with what appeared to be authentic engagement. He read extensively about systemic racism, attended workshops led by civil rights attorneys, and met with former employees he had harmed to listen to their experiences and offer apologies. Diana agreed to meet with Richard 9 months after the trial, at his request and with a mediator present. He sat across from her in a conference room and said words she had never expected to hear. "Diana, I spent 15 years seeing you as a tool rather than a person. I stole your work. I exploited your vulnerability. I benefited from systems of racial discrimination that I never questioned because they served me well. I cannot undo that harm, but I want you to know that I understand now what I did and why it was wrong. I am grateful for the education I have received, even though it came at the cost of my career and my reputation. You deserve so much better, and I am deeply sorry." Diana listened, studied his face for signs of performance or manipulation, and found what seemed to be genuine remorse. She did not forgive him, not entirely, but she acknowledged his words and his efforts. "Richard, transformation is possible for anyone willing to do the work. I hope you continue learning. I hope you use what you have learned to help dismantle the systems you participated in for so long." Richard was eventually allowed to return to legal practice, but not as a partner or a courtroom attorney. He joined a nonprofit legal aid organization, working on housing discrimination cases and representing low-income tenants against exploitative landlords. His salary was a fraction of what he had earned at Ashford and Partners. His status was non-existent, and his ego had been thoroughly dismantled. But the work appeared to be meaningful to him, and several of his former colleagues reported seeing genuine change in his behavior and his values. Diana watched his progress from a distance, neither celebrating nor condemning, simply observing and hoping that justice had included the possibility of redemption. Diana herself had transformed in ways that went beyond professional success, reclaiming not just her career but her sense of self and her relationship with her son. She and Marcus moved from their small Harlem apartment to a beautiful brownstone in Brooklyn, using money from her trust fund and her new managing partner's salary. Marcus transferred to an excellent public school with strong academics and robust support for students with asthma and other health conditions. Diana hired a nanny to ensure Marcus was never alone after school, and she made a commitment to be home for dinner at least 4 nights a week, to attend his soccer games and school performances, to be present in her life in ways she had not been able to manage when she was working in Richard's basement. One evening about a year after the trial, Marcus sat at their kitchen table doing homework while Diana prepared dinner, and he looked up at her with his serious 8-year-old face and said, "Mom, are you happy now?" Diana stopped chopping vegetables and turned to face her son. "Yes, baby, I am happy." "Are you?" Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I like our new house. I like that you are home more. And I like that you do not cry anymore." Diana sat down next to him, pulled him into her lap even though he was getting too big for such things, and held him close. "I cried because I felt trapped and powerless," she explained gently. "But then I remembered that I was never actually powerless. I had knowledge and evidence and truth, and when I finally used those things, everything changed. You will always have power, Marcus. Never let anyone convince you that you do not." Her son hugged her tightly and whispered, "I know, Mom. I watched you in that courtroom. You were amazing." As Marcus returned to his homework and Diana finished preparing dinner, she felt something she had not felt in 15 years. Not just happiness, though there was that. Not just satisfaction, though she had earned it. What she felt was peace, the deep, quiet peace of knowing that justice had been served, that transformation was possible, that her life was finally completely her own. Have you or someone you know experienced workplace discrimination where your contributions were stolen or your dignity was disregarded? Share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters, and speaking out can inspire others to seek justice and reclaim their power. Sharing these experiences creates community and reminds everyone who has been exploited that they are not alone, that change is possible, and that courage can transform not just individual lives but entire systems. If stories of justice, empowerment, and transformation resonate with you, if you believe that everyone deserves dignity and fair treatment in the workplace, regardless of race or position, please subscribe to our channel so you never miss another powerful story like Diana's journey. These stories matter because they show us that justice is not just an abstract concept, but something real people can achieve through courage, preparation, and unwavering commitment to truth. Each story we share has the potential to inspire someone else to stand up, to document their experiences, to seek help, and to refuse to accept exploitation as inevitable. Subscribe now to be part of this community of people who believe that workplaces can be equitable, that talent deserves recognition, and that systems of discrimination can be dismantled when enough people commit to doing the hard work of change. Ready for another inspiring story of courage triumphing over injustice? Click the video appearing on your screen right now to discover how one person's refusal to stay silent created ripples of change that transformed an entire community. Watch it next and continue this journey of learning about resilience, justice, and the power of speaking truth to power. These stories connect us, educate us, and remind us that transformation is always possible when we choose courage over comfort and justice over silence. Drop a comment 15 if you believe dignity and truth are worth fighting. For 15 years, she documented every injustice, and her patience became her power.